Good morning, everybody. The Simple Handicap for Wednesday, November 20th. Thank you for making me a part of your morning. This episode is going to double as the Week 12 Picks and Preview live stream. And so if you're watching this on YouTube and you were wondering why there's nothing going on the screen, you're in the right spot, you're in the right video, but because of the bomb cyclone that is rolling through the Pacific Northwest, that is inevitably going to take out our power on Wednesday, I wanted to pre-record this episode and make sure everyone had access to it in the usual time without any disruptions. And so I thought this was best just in case it looks as bad as it is going to be wind, rain, and weather-wise. We're right on the coast, and when we had the atmospheric river, I mean, they're just making names up, I feel like, at this point for how bad the weather is becoming. But when we had that a couple of weeks ago, we lost power right away, and it was out for a long time. And so I don't want to have everybody hanging, and after what happened Sunday with the delay, I just want to get the usual routine going. So I decided to pre-record this. This will not be a live stream, but if you do have comments about any of the games, any of the comments, anything that you want to know, below in the comment section, you can ask it. There's a comment section on Spotify, comment section on YouTube, whatever you want to know about the games. Feel free to drop your comments in there. I'll have updates throughout the week as we go in the pinned comment section on the YouTube video as well as I have the last couple of weeks. With all that said, let's start and get to it with Thursday Night Football. It's the Pittsburgh Steelers on the road at the Cleveland Browns. Steelers 3.5-point favorites on the point spread. Total in this game 36, with some 36.5s showing. And so this game, as I've talked about on the podcast really the entire week, is 100% dictated by the weather. Now, we look at multiple forecasts and multiple models to try get the best understanding of the weather that we can. Here is what I know at this point as I'm recording this late on Tuesday night, Pacific time, early morning, Eastern Standard Time. 80% chance of snow in this game with winds between 15 and 25 miles per hour. It is also, obviously, with the chance of snow, going to be right around the freezing mark for temperature throughout the game. When I'm looking at this total, there's been nothing but under money so far bet into it. And while I have not bet on the over in this game, I will say at 36, that is the only direction that I would be tempted to go. The Pittsburgh Steelers last week had a very noisy game in terms of how much they drove down the field, how often they were within scoring position and just couldn't get the ball into the end zone. And that, to me, deflated a little bit of what their scoreline could have been against a Ravens defense that has been getting everyone over the total, it seems like, on a weekly basis. And I don't think the Steelers were necessarily an exception in that, as they still, again, had many chances over 300 yards, but defensively allowed north of 6 yards per play in that matchup. Cleveland very much in a similar circumstance, as offensively they were consistently driving, consistently in the red zone, 450 total yards, 6.3 yards per play, and they end up with 14 points. And so coming out of the games last week, both of these teams with scoreboards not reflecting how many chances each had on offense. But what stood out to me was the Steelers really, to me, look like a bit of an over defense at the moment. Offensively, boom or bust with explosive plays or not sustaining a lot of drives. And I think about this Browns defense, which I kind of watch quit in a way against the Saints. Some of that injury aided, but some of that just the circumstance of the season and how things are falling off. Obviously allowed a ton of big plays to the Saints. 8.2 yards per play allowed by the Browns, their worst mark of the entire season. And that's coming after games where they allowed 6.8 and 6.2 yards per play, nearly 400 yards in both of those games prior to allowing 473 to the Saints. And so I'm looking at this game with obviously a very short total at 36 that has been bet down 6 points since the opener of 42. The weather is driving this one down, but I see Pittsburgh, if they're able to, going to have the chance of finding those big explosive plays they've been accustomed to. Cleveland, on the other hand, very vulnerable to those explosive plays. And to me, if this weather subsides between now and kickoff on Thursday, specifically looking at the wind, if that sustained number gets down into like the mid-teens or the low teens, I'm looking at this total as being a little bit too short. And there was some minor confirmation on that thought line yesterday as we saw some of the 36 turn back into 36.5 at Chris Circa and Buckeye. I'll have updates on this in the pin thread on the YouTube video later in the week, closer to kickoff on Thursday, if I do anything once the weather is a little more clear. It prevents anything from happening, but that's just my stance on this and what I would be looking at. And so no play for me on this one, but keep in mind with the weather what could come from this, and I'll have an update later in the week. Moving on to Sunday, it's Detroit on the road at the Indianapolis Colts. I like the Colts here at home plus 7.5. I'm looking at the Detroit Lions, and obviously they're the best team in the NFL. Absolutely rolling, and they're just dominating and blowing out opponents. 52-14 win against Tennessee, 52-6 win against Jacksonville. They beat up on Houston in the comeback effort where Houston didn't have Nico Collins, were down multiple other starters on offense. They end up beating up the Packers in the weather game, which was impacted for 4 quarters and just set up very well for the Lions to work behind their offensive line. However, something that I think is being hidden amid some of these blowouts and this dominance is the defense. And the defense had another blow given to them in the Jacksonville game as they lose Alex Anzalone. He's the green dot in the middle. He's the defensive captain, and he was the next big presence on the defense behind Aiden Hutchinson, who obviously was lost a couple of weeks ago. Now, when I'm thinking about this Lions defense specifically, when you take Anzalone out, you lose a big portion of the middle. But what is also happening in the Lions defensive middle is losses to other guys. They lost Derek Barnes to IR. He's going to be out of the picture. They have a couple other fringe starters, main starters, who are also banged up in the middle. And so past DJ Reader and past Aleem McNeil at that second level, not a lot of run-stopping talent in there with Anzalone no longer roaming the middle of the field. When I think about what the Colts want to do on offense with Anthony Richardson back, with Jonathan Taylor operating next to him, becoming more efficient, they're very much looking to put linebackers in a bind and attack the middle of the field. And that, to me, is an option that Shane Steichen can go through and exploit. And so, to me, I look at the Tennessee Titans game. Similar level of personnel and how they were handling things in that game with usage of backs, not nearly to the extent that Indianapolis is going to be able to. That was a game where the Titans put up 416 yards. The Packers, to some extent, with Jacobs on the ground and how they want to utilize personnel, 411 yards. Houston, again, banged up with some of their wide receivers, a team that's far less equipped to attack that portion of the field comparatively to the Indianapolis Colts, and it was 250 yards despite an anemic passing game that wasn't existent, which we saw the Colts open up a little bit. And so I do think in this matchup, with it above a touchdown at 7.5, this isn't a walkover Colts team. This is a Colts team that is still live and, to me, showed life at the end, coming back against the Jets at home in this spot with Detroit on the short week with the Thanksgiving game coming up early Thursday. This, to me, is a game where Indianapolis is going to be able to keep it competitive and stay within the number. So I like the Colts here at home plus 7.5. Kansas City on the road at the Carolina Panthers. Chiefs are 11-point favorites, and they have been for the duration of the week. Total from 41.5 was holding steady yesterday until late afternoon. It was bet up to 43 and even touching 43.5 at a couple of different places. Now, don't have an opinion on this game on the side nor the total. I was almost convinced to get involved with Carolina. I was almost convinced to get involved with the total to the over. I didn't play either, and I've not played either, and I don't think I'm going to be involved with either when the game comes down to it. A couple interesting things to think about. Carolina has struggled against the run all season. They've been bad against everybody. Coming out of the bye, even if DJ Wanham is able to go, I don't think it's a spot where the Panthers automatically just become better against the run. The one game where they showed well defensively, really in the last 2 months, was against the New York Giants, who are obviously very limited offensively. Held them to 4.8 yards per play in the win when they were playing in Germany. Against the Saints, that was the Saints team that was very banged up. They got the win 23-22. Very misleading. There's still big issues here. Multiple games before the Giants, who, by the way, put up 350 yards, where the Panthers conceded at least 400 yards per game, 5 in a row. And so, the Panthers, they're not getting stops up front. There is a outside chance that Isaiah Pacheco returns for Kansas City in this game. If the Chiefs happen to have Pacheco, even if they don't, and this is a Kareem Hunt game, the Chiefs are going to be able to move the football on the ground. And when it comes to getting tight ends involved, I think anything's wide open here for Kansas City. The question is, how much do they want to push as they're inevitably going to have a big lead? I think with the offensive issues that they have been having, I'm looking at Kansas City the last number of weeks, and their offensive outputs have been quite poor. They just haven't had that game where everything's clicked. They haven't had a get-right game, if you will, for a very long time. And so in this spot against the Panthers defense, which schedule-wise is absolutely the easiest defense they have faced in a long time. You look back at the schedule, Buffalo, tough defense. Denver, very tough defense. Tampa Bay, it's Todd Bowles, it's the blitz, it's tough personnel. It's a tough defense, even though they're not playing to the level that they should be. The Raiders, bit of an underrated defense in terms of how they prevent certain things that Kansas City likes to push. San Francisco, again, playing better than their numbers suggest. It's been a tough run of defenses for the Chiefs in terms of who they have faced. And this is just such a step down in class where they're going to be able to run the football and get what they want. Now, for the Panthers on offense, this is going to be a very tough matchup going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. And in this spot specifically, like I'm thinking about Carolina, if they have Brooks involved with some packages out of the backfield, if they have Thielen working as well, I think there's enough where they can contribute their share of the total. What gives me a little bit of pause as we kind of recap and go through this handicap is everything about the Panthers so far this week has been these guys that are returning are going to be on a pitch count. And so as the Panthers put up 4.9 yards per play against a struggling Saints defense, 5.5 per play against a struggling Giants secondary, they're struggling to get into the 300-yard mark, and I think that's going to be a tough ask to exceed that against the Chiefs, even if Kansas City has some issues in depth at corner that's not turning out to be as good as it was. Obviously, this pass rush for the Chiefs can blow up the Panthers' offense. It's just not a lot of confidence there for me, and for the Chiefs, if they do get sitting on a big lead, are they going to really run this up? Are the left tackle issues that they're having possibly exploited by the Panthers if a guy like Wanham comes back? Hard to say it's going to impact the game like it did with the Bills, but I don't know. I get stuck with this, and seeing the over money come in and out 43, it's just not something I want to jump into, and I think the side for this game specifically is priced right. Minnesota on the road at the Chicago Bears. There was a release from a pro yesterday on Minnesota that took the threes out and pushed us up to 3.5. The total has been bet down from 41 to 39. I struggle to have much of an opinion on this game. When I think about what the Bears did last week against the Green Bay Packers, there was a lot more life to the offense. It certainly looked different than what it was under Shane Waldron. There was that reset and that just inevitable rebound that you're going to get from the offensive coordinator change. Does it repeat against Brian Flores? That's a pretty tall ask. I think the answer is that it looks a little bit closer to what it was, struggling, than any type of resurgence that we are going to see in this spot against this Vikings defense and against this Vikings pass rush specifically. So I think we see the Bears offense take a bit of a step back. For the Vikings on the other side, as tempted as I am to get involved with them on the side in this, it's road game number 3 in a row. It's laying points again on the road. This is a different task, as much as the Bears are in a bit of a disarray with what's going on offense and defense and the coaching changes. Minnesota's benefited from playing the Jacksonville Jags, who were in full-on quit mode 2 weeks ago, and then playing the Tennessee Titans last week. This is a different challenge, and it's a step up. And what I will say about the Bears is their offensive line got healthier. Guys came back in the secondary. It's an elevated unit on both sides of the ball, basically, from what we've seen in the last game comparatively to the last 3 weeks as well. And so that's potentially a negative here for Minnesota. If you're stacking roster by roster, coaching staff by coaching staff, QB versus QB, you're giving the edge to Minnesota in all of those. I just don't know if the spot is great for the Vikings in this game. And so it's a stay away for me. I don't have much of an opinion on here, side nor total. Dallas on the road at the Washington Commanders. Commanders are 10.5-point favorites. I see 10 still at Circa. I see 10 at Bet Online. I see 10 at Heritage. I see 10 at FanDuel as well in this game. And so while the majority of numbers are 10.5, I think 10 here certainly still available and in play for anybody who wants to grab it. I like Washington here in this game, minus 10. The reason I like the Commanders is because of a note that we heard from Dan Quinn, where he said that Jaden Daniels, off of the mini-bye, is going to have a full week of practice and preparation. It's hard not to notice how the splits for Jaden Daniels the last couple of games since he suffered the rib injury have been drastically different from what they were earlier in the season. He's run the football less, he's run the football less effectively, and he's been missing a lot of throws. His off-target percentage has spiked. So if this is a game where Quinn felt the need in pressers to affirm that Daniels was going to have a full week of practice, perhaps this is the first week we've seen Jaden Daniels healthy in about a month's time. And if that is the case, then there's a chance certainly that the Commanders come into this game slightly undervalued. Do I think that this is a team deserving of some of their October ratings where they were near the top in the league and we were seeing a historically great offense? No, I don't think that at all. But in this circumstance where we're seeing a number that is not adjusted up at all, and in fact, in some ways is adjusted down from where we were on the look-ahead market, to me, Washington losing to Philadelphia with an injured QB looks far better than Dallas getting beat up by Houston at home, and then adding on the fact that they're likely down 3 starting offensive linemen for this game and still dealing with defensive injuries and obviously still starting Cooper Rush at quarterback. They announced that Trey Lance will have packages in this game. That becomes a bit of a ugly spot to consider as well. Now, something that was kind of intriguing to me and might have me involved on the total in this game is Dallas with Cooper Rush at home against Houston played extremely quick. They were 24 seconds per snap. That's one of the fastest tempos that you're going to see from a team ever in an NFL game. The Washington Commanders all season have played very quick, and that's just a Cliff Kingsbury offense and how it operates. And so this is a total that was 43 on the look ahead, has been adjusted up to 44.5. It's a number that I could potentially see creeping up and continuing to creep up as we get closer to game time and maybe see and hear more information about Jaden Daniels specifically. But something I like to look at in here, I don't believe that Mike McCarthy can be fired post-game with the Thanksgiving game on deck. I think there's obviously a massive focus for the Cowboys on that game. I'm not saying that they're looking past this Commanders game, but it was hard not to notice at least some level of quit being shown by the defense in that Houston Monday night game. And so to me here, with the Commanders off extra time to prep, with Daniels healthier, with Dallas down guys on the O-line, an offense that can do absolutely nothing with Cooper Rush under center, now mixing in multiple quarterbacks and having that possible coach fired in the near future /quit /short turnaround for Thanksgiving on Thursday. A lot of negatives here for the Cowboys in this specific matchup. So I like the Commanders here getting the win and getting the cover, even with the big point spread being laid. Tampa Bay on the road at the New York Giants. Buccaneers are 5.5-point favorites across the board. Total from 43.5 at open down to 41.5. Give me Tommy DeVito plus 5.5. This is going to make a lot of folks wince and grimace. You probably have comments about this too. I've already had multiple comments about my hinted like of the Giants coming into this game so far this week in the comments. The reason I like the Giants in this game is simply price. Last year, one of the best betting angles for us as a group and in the service was taking the backup quarterback discount. And I'm trying to not get reminiscent of backing DeVito against the Green Bay Packers, which was one of our biggest and best bets last year that we had all season, where they were 6.5-point dogs at home to the Packers and nearly won outright. But here's my thing with this. I don't feel like the drop from Daniel Jones in his state and how much he was struggling and how much this offense was struggling to Tommy DeVito, as bad and terrible and as horrible as a quarterback as he is deserving of this big of a downgrade against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the downgrade that's being labeled in the market is 2 points from basically an expensive 3 through now to an expensive 5.5. When you cross through 4 and 5 in 2024 and you're coming off of the 3.5, that's a significant move. And I don't know if the Giants are a team that were in such an offensive disarray to be deserving of that big of a downgrade. I just don't. And the reason I'm partially saying that, beyond just the talent and perhaps lack thereof that the Giants have had, is that the Buccaneers, in my opinion, are going through a spot where they need to be downgraded too. And so both of these teams are off of the bye, so that negates any bye advantage or any prep advantage. But Tampa Bay lost Tristan Wirfs in the game pre-bye. He's their best offensive lineman. Mike Evans should be back, and so you have those two perhaps effectively offsetting. But where I think this is a disadvantage for Tampa Bay is Baker Mayfield is very sensitive to pressure in the pocket. The one spot of the Giants team, offense or defense, that's been solid all season is their defensive line, causing problems up front. Against this Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive line without their best offensive lineman, even if Evans is back, the Giants D-line has the chance to take over this game and really stall the Buccaneers offense. And on the other side, to the counterpoint of this, Tommy DeVito at least is willing to get out of the pocket and run. For all the negatives he's had, and as bad as he is, he's willing to get out and take off. Against a Todd Bowles blitzing defense and this Giants offensive line, that's maybe a positive over Daniel Jones, who certainly has mobility himself. But maybe this is a spot where DeVito is willing to use his legs and run a little bit and get outside the pocket to extend plays to negate some of the blitz. The point is, we're going from 3.5 to 5.5. To me, it feels like a lot here for downgrading from the Giants on what is a team that's tough to downgrade from. The main argument that has been thrown at me for my support of the Giants through the podcast so far this week was when I said that the Giants team this year is a better spot for DeVito to come into than the Giants team last year. And everybody said last year this Giants team was better. If I'm looking at EPA per play on offense or defense, last year at this time of the season, the Giants ranked worse on both offense and on defense than where they were a season ago heading into week 12. On offense, it was by about 4 ranking spots. On defense, it was by 2. So it was a worse roster, a worse performing in-game offense and defense. And perhaps that's enough in a one-game sample to give DeVito a bit of a push. Now, something I would add in here is Brian Daboll was basically put in the spotlight saying that he's effectively coaching for his job here the next month and a half to end the season. And if there's any life left from Daboll as a play caller, perhaps this quarterback change signals who he feels best with, and maybe you get a good game out of Daboll in this spot. So again, like it's hard to make a damning and overwhelming case to support the Giants in the spot with DeVito for as bad as he is. I just look at the price here and I'm like, this is a bit too much. New England on the road at the Miami Dolphins. Dolphins 7-point favorites across the board. Total in this game, 45.5. I like the Pats plus 7. I like over 45.5 in this game as well. I'm really floored by the support that Drake May has been getting from film analysts over the last 48 hours. Nothing but glowing support. And I mean, you watch the Pats games and you see it. He's a quarterback that should have been starting from week 1. And now he's getting his time, and he very much looks the part. It looks like New England has found their long-term starter. In this matchup specifically against the Miami Dolphins, I think he continues to air the ball out, and I think he has the chance to have success. The Miami Dolphins against the Raiders allowed a league average in yards per play to Gardner Minshew, and in an offense that's, in my opinion, more limited than what you're getting from the New England Patriots. And that was enough for the Raiders to get to the 19-point mark against the Los Angeles Rams in a game that went incredibly fast. The Dolphins kind of got lucky with that 23-15 win. That was a spot where they allowed 5 yards per play to the Rams and 330 yards. As we know, against Buffalo is another spot where the Dolphins defense got away with a lot. Even though they ended up losing 30-27, that was a game that could have looked a lot worse. And against Arizona, they just couldn't get stops. Now, having Sealer back on the defensive line is a big boost to the pass rush, but May has proven with his mobility that he can negate some of that. And you weren't seeing mobility from Minshew, and you were seeing a Rams offensive line that had some new pieces being shuffled through. And so I think this is a spot where the Pats offense continues to move the football. I think we see them continue with this league average output for what you're getting on a per play basis, and they're going to show well enough to stay within the number. When it gets to the total, I think what we're seeing from New England is a bit of a weaker secondary. Certainly against the Rams, they were tore up pretty well as they didn't have an answer for the Rams wide receivers. I do want to say that the Dolphins offense really relied on the run game in the first matchup with Ingold and the running backs. They've shifted back with Tua obviously back in the picture, who wasn't there in the first game. A lot of quick passes. There hasn't been a ton of explosive plays downfield since his return. Defenses have been really able to contain what's in front of them. I don't see the Pats erasing Miami and keeping them off the scoreboard entirely. But what I do think we see is two key guys matching up well for the Pats defense to keep them competitive enough. The first is Christian Gonzalez, who's going to be matched up with Tyreek Hill. He matched up one-on-one with Hill last season. There were a lot of comments post-game from Hill for how great Gonzalez was, and that was Hill fully healthy. We know Tyreek Hill is not 100%. Gonzalez and his physicality is going to be able to match up with him on the line of scrimmage. As Hill has that wrist injury, there's going to be opportunities for Gonzalez to limit what Tyreek Hill can do in the passing game. Also, last week, the return of Christian Barmore was on a limited basis. He didn't get in the full week of prep. He's going to get the full week of prep, and he's going to make a difference against the Dolphins' run game, which they are going to look at mixing in with their multiple backs and potentially getting Ingold back as well, which just opens up so much in the run game for them if he is able to go. And so, again, I don't think that the Pats keep the Dolphins completely off the board, but I do think they're competitive enough to where they limit a lot of the big explosive plays and are able to keep this within a one touchdown margin. And so I'm looking at this game as a 27-23 type of game in Miami. I think we see the Pats cover. I think we see this game go over the total. And in terms of the Pats too, something that stands out to me, which I've referenced on the podcast, is I'm looking at them at 3-8. And I look around the rest of the conference and the rest of the league even at some of these other 3-8 teams or 2-8 teams like the Browns and the Titans and the Raiders or the Jets, or on the NFC side, it's the Panthers and the Cowboys. All of those teams have downsides and reasons to quit. And we're seeing it, whether it's coaching problems, whether it's injuries, whether it's instability at the quarterback position. To me, the Pats are the one team at the bottom of their division and at the bottom of standings which don't have that element built into their team. They're still trying to develop Drake May, their quarterback of the future. You have the owner still trying to push the team to get wins to justify letting the best head coach of all time go. And you still have a new head coach who's fully bought in to trying to push effort on the field and is calling out units of his team. I think there's positives in terms of the Pats and trusting them late in games, and we've seen that against Tennessee where they're grinding down to the last play. We've seen that against the Rams last week with multiple drives late to try cut the deficit and win. And we're just not seeing a lot of quit from this Pats team late in games. And so at this time of the year where you start to see teams' intentions shift, I just don't see the Pats necessarily wavering, and I think that's a nice quality to have when you're getting a touchdown in your favor on the road. Tennessee Titans on the road at the Houston Texans. Texans down from 9 to 8.5. Total from 43, adjusted down to 41. Not a lot here for me in this game specifically. I don't have a play on the side. I don't have a play on the total. I find the Titans kind of a tough team to grade and gauge. They're terrible against the point spread. They continue to have respectable offensive outputs, but it's just mistakes and issues that run into them and plague their offense. Defensively, very good at preventing explosive plays, very good at getting pressure on opposing quarterbacks. It's an underrated defense that should be getting more covers for their team than they have, and it's just an offense that has not been able to capitalize with either quarterback. Some of the defensive outputs that we've seen, they held Minnesota and Kevin O'Connell and Justin Jefferson and all these pieces to 4.7 yards per play last week. They outgained them by 0.6 yards per play total. They held the Chargers and Justin Herbert, who's playing at an exceptional level, to 5.4 yards per play. They outgained them 5.7 to 5.4. They held the New England Patriots to 4.6 yards per play, but they needed overtime. Another game, 3 in a row, where they outgained their opponent. I mean, they've just had solid defensive games the last couple of weeks, and it goes back to earlier in the season as well, where they had some standout performances that looked great defensively, that the offense just didn't hold their side of the bargain. To me, Houston, on the other hand, is a team that's really trying to figure things out. It's an offense that perhaps is underrated from the perspective that they've been hampered with injuries and lost key pieces, but they're not getting big blowout wins. And perhaps the win against Dallas, which was made to look maybe a little bit better than it actually was when you look through how that game transpired. I know there were points taken off the board multiple times for Houston, but they also benefited from the pick six. Now, they're kind of at a tipping point here to where you're saying, okay, 6.5 yards per play. Was that more an impact of the Cowboys' defense and some of the issues they have? Or is this a team now turning the corner with Nico Collins back, with Joe Mixon continuing to drive the offense forward, with everything kind of coming around, and you're potentially saying that they're underrated? I think it's a tough kind of spot to gauge for Houston at kind of the swing point in the season. If I'm looking at just something like FPI and where they're rating offensively, Houston is all the way down near the middle of the league. They're rated 0.0, which effectively makes their offensive rating league average. If I'm looking at unpredictable specifically, and I'm trying to gauge, like, what are we looking at from a market perspective, and where is this Texans offense? Houston is a team right now that is rated 9th, which is 1.6 points better than an average offense in the NFL. And so market ratings and this price specifically have Houston priced a lot closer to where they were earlier in the season, and there's not a lot of room to get to kind of near the peak that they were at. Some other ratings that are looking more on field perhaps have a bit of a timing issue built in, where they're grading some of those games without Collins, without Diggs, with Dell dinged up, and against some tougher opponents too. They're weighting those a little bit strongly, and that's penalizing what the overall rating for them should be. And so I have a tough time with this one, looking at them, as the Titans are such a noisy team, and Houston is kind of split in terms of where they're being rated. So it's a pass on the side and a pass on the total for me in this one. Denver on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. Broncos a 5.5-point favorite in this game with a total of 41. Look-ahead line was 3. Reopen was 3.5, and we've seen the Broncos get bet up in a big way. Their market rating now is the highest that it has been for the entire season. They made a jump, as I'm looking back, just 2 weeks ago. They were rated around 2 points worse than an average team in the NFL. They are now rated in market as 0.3 points better than an average football team. Offensively, I think that's where a lot of noise is going to come from. I see them rated anywhere from 21st all the way to 23rd. And some of the bump that I believe we're seeing in the market is they're getting bet up weekly. Last week, they were bet up more than 3.5 points. This week already, bet up more than 2.5 points. Comes from Bo Nix specifically. When you have a rookie quarterback, I think it's tough to get to a true rating for what a team is, because it's really hard to grade what an overperform is. Now, if I'm looking at the Denver Broncos the last couple of weeks, last week against Atlanta was a perfect scenario. They faced a Falcons team that cannot generate any pass rush whatsoever. Bo Nix was kept clean in the pocket. The Broncos' O-line dominated, and they put up 6.7 yards per play and 400 yards. We've seen teams against the Atlanta Falcons have massive outputs because of how easy it is up front for them to do what they want. I mean, the Saints put up 7.1 yards per play. The Cowboys put up 5.1. The Buccaneers put up 6.4 and 6.5 yards per play. The Seahawks put up 6.1. I mean, teams are able to have big offensive outputs against the Atlanta Falcons. And so lots of kind of like peak excitement around Bo Nix. And now we're hearing his Rookie of the Year case starting to gain traction, and his prices are dropping. I think the Atlanta game exaggerated some of that. I think the Carolina game, or even the Saints game, where you're facing a Panthers defense that, again, zero pass rush up front. A Saints defense banged up, injuries, zero pass rush, a struggling defense against a run. I mean, we've seen 3 of the last 4 weeks just perfect opponents for the Broncos. The 2 games where they had to step up and face the Ravens and the Chiefs, better defenses, we saw them fall back down to earth with 4.7 yards per play output in both of those games. So in that perspective, I think the Broncos are becoming a pretty noisy team, and the reason we're seeing a lot of these moves is because you're trying to just figure out what Bo Nix is and how to grade him, and that's a tough task to do, as it is with any rookie quarterback. Now, for the Las Vegas Raiders, league average defending the run so far this season. Their biggest vulnerability has been against the pass, where they allow a lot of easy completions underneath. Their success rate numbers, their EPA numbers, both of those are trending towards 27th, 28th in the league. There's not a lot of discrepancy between them, and they just allow a lot of easy completions underneath. But they are better against the run, and they are better at generating a pass rush than some of these weaker opponents we've seen Denver have a lot of success against in the last couple of weeks. And so when you're looking at this game at its current price, the question is, do the Broncos still have room to go? And is this truly a team that's going to be above average? And do you think they've not yet reached their ceiling? Or is this a team that has benefited really outside of 2 games the last month and a half from playing opponents that have made them kind of have very easy offensive game plans? And that's an answer that I don't have. And at this price point, it's not really one I want to try figure out and take into the market in this game. So it's a pass for me, but that's really what you're looking at in this spot. Arizona on the road at the Seattle Seahawks. I'm seeing Arizona a 1-point favorite at Chris. I'm seeing them a pick'em at Circa and Buckeye. Some other books have Seattle as a 1 minus 105 favorite. That's DK. That's ESPN Bet. That's Pinnacle. That's FanDuel as well. So number is very split here. We're not going to significant numbers when we're bouncing on either side of a pick'em. I don't have a play on side or total in this game, but I think I'll certainly have an updated opinion on this one later in the week. Again, I would encourage everybody to look at the pinned comment underneath the YouTube video as the week goes on. I post updates throughout the week, and the last update typically goes out around Sunday at 9 a.m. Pacific, so anything up to that point, you may see an update in there. Last week had the Rams minus 4.5 and Herbert rushing yards over 13.5. Both of which added wins to the video if you were following along. This is a fun matchup. And again, another matchup that I just struggle a little bit to get to a confident stance to where I'm able to get in, because I have questions about both of these teams. The biggest question about either of these teams is specifically Seattle on defense. Last week against the 49ers, they hold San Francisco to 4.9 yards per play and 277 yards. Visually, what I was watching was an improved Seattle Seahawks defense. I believe that this is a unit of a team in a league which is underpriced. I'm seeing them in market ratings 20th for defensive rating when it comes to FPI. I'm seeing them right around 19th as well. So to me, it's a unit that's still underrated. I think Mike McDonald gets this unit to an above average rating by the time we get to the end of the season. To me, watching that game against San Francisco, it looks like he has the pieces that he wants in place. And now it's a matter of time to get the scheme clicking to where he wants it to be. I think Seattle coming into this game has a bit of a house money mentality. That's a bit of a maybe commercial and phony term, but I mean, you get the drive to save the season that you desperately needed. And now it's a bit of a reset. And this is such a big game against Arizona leading the division that it's like, to me, Seattle's coming into this one playing pretty free. They had the monkey on their back of beating San Francisco, something Geno Smith was never able to do in his time in Seattle. They checked that off. It seems like the defense is coming together. You check that off. The offensive line, which had their center leave on Thursday in practice last week, looked to protect Geno a little bit better with Lucas coming back. You start to see things clicking there. You give like a half check. It's just like everything's starting to kind of come together for Seattle. Now, on the other side, Arizona has had everything going their way for numerous weeks in a row. And the question that I have with Arizona, who right now is rated right around league average in ratings, I'm looking at market ratings, they're 17th. When I go to FPI overall, trying to see where they're rating, they're inside the top 11. They're 1.4 points better. The offense is rated quite high as well in both of them, inside the top 12. I think that's a fair rating for what we're looking at. And if I want to criticize anything from Arizona, I would say taking into account the opponents, especially the last 2 weeks, matter. Arizona won both of their games going into their bye at home. They beat up the New York Jets, 7.1 yards per play to 3.8. They won 31-6, but, I mean, it was evident the Jets were clearly showing signs of quit on defense. So much so that the coach had to do a tackling demonstration 48 hours after the game concluded. And it was all kinds of levels of bad from the Jets. Against the Bears, we know that there was levels of quit shown on both sides because not only did the offensive coordinator get fired, a key defensive starter in the backfield was pushed out of practice and benched. You had multiple offensive linemen out. You had a key defensive lineman for the Bears lost as well. So that's a noisy game too, that the Cardinals win 29-9. The Miami comeback game, well, the Dolphins defense again was down a couple of key starters, and that was a game that required the come from behind effort. The Chargers game, there were hidden points from the Chargers in that spot as well, where the Cardinals certainly got the benefit of those plays. They were outgained in that game and quite frankly should have lost. And so this Cardinals team, if I'm looking at kind of the trajectory of the season, even in that 49ers game where San Francisco didn't have a kicker and couldn't convert and the Cardinals needed the big comeback, really, there's a lot of noise here for the Cardinals. And I'm having a hard time figuring out really what they are and who they should be and where they rank. If I'm looking at their ranking overall, my impression of this team is they're at their ceiling right now with their current rating. Again, right around league average, 16th or 17th. The offense between 11th and 13th makes a lot of sense for where they should be. The defense around 20th, to me, is benefiting from some of these teams that they have faced and some of the quarterbacks and some of the offenses that they have faced well as the timing that they have and some of the breaks that they have gotten. Like, I struggle to have the Cardinals rated a lot higher than where they are. And so in this spot with such importance on this game, like I'm looking at the Seahawks, and if I can get a little bit more news about their O-line and perhaps a little bit more confirmation about what I'm seeing from their defense, I know the Cardinals have been bet because collective composite ratings have them rated a lot higher than Seattle, and it warrants this being around Arizona -1. I do feel like we're seeing Arizona priced to their peak, and perhaps Seattle is a little bit underrated here if that defense is going to continue to improve. And I wonder if that's going to get me on Seattle later in the week. San Francisco on the road at the Green Bay Packers. Give me Packers -2.5 in this one. It's my favorite side of the week. I'm looking at Green Bay in this game, and I think there's a lot of positives that come from them not being anywhere close to their ceiling so far from a pricing perspective. But what I'm also intrigued with is positives that come from negatives that we might see emerge from the 49ers team so far this week. I believe Brock Purdy is dealing with a shoulder injury. It was something that came out and he was labeled day to day. When you watch the hit back and you see what he dealt with, there's signs there that might limit him going into this game. Obviously a big negative. George Kittle is not 100%. I think we're seeing Christian McCaffrey not quite at 100% either. We know Trent Williams is not at 100%. Nick Bosa has been hampered with a hip injury that has made him look far worse than he should be in the last 2 games that he has played. And last week he had to leave the game in the second half, did not return, and that's typically not a great indication that he is going to be on the field. I don't know what's going on with Fred Warner. In the last 5 games, he has been targeted 30 times by opposing quarterbacks. He has conceded 30 receptions. That's something to me that's hard to believe for the best linebacker in the NFL. You just don't see numbers anywhere close to that for Warner. And so is that something that he's dealing with that's not being discussed? Or is that perhaps him trying to overcompensate for struggles of Campbell and make up for the absence of Ward? A lot of questions with that too. And so, not to mention Ward is still unclear from personal reasons if he's going to be back and playing in this game. There's a lot of question marks about San Francisco and a team that continues to struggle in the red zone, where historically they've been great. We're seeing a lot of regression in that side too. A lot of negatives here. And so them now going on the road to play at Lambeau in a revenge spot where the Packers get the lucky win and are still really trying to figure things out, I think is a spot that bodes well for Green Bay. And if I have to throw an extra little piece in here, this game has a ton of familiarity on both sides, between the coaching staffs, between the teams. I mean, everybody on either side knows what's coming. But if I was to tip the scales a little bit in favor of the Green Bay Packers, a few weeks ago, Robert Saleh was added to the staff to specifically help out with the offense. And to me, when that move was made, I viewed it as Matt LaFleur adding him to the offensive staff to help him and the team get over the hump and the hurdles of San Francisco and of Detroit when it gets into the postseason. In terms of just, again, tipping the scales a little bit in favor of Green Bay, having him as a part of the staff for game planning and installing an offensive game plan against the defense which he coached, which still remains keeping a very similar scheme that made the effort to change back to it after the firing of Steve Wilkes in the offseason and how Sorensen has been running it. I think that's another positive in this spot for Green Bay. And so I like the Packers here, -2.5 at home. Philadelphia on the road at the LA Rams. Eagles a soft 3-point favorite on the road. Total in this game, 48.5. We released over 48 as part of the service. It got up to 50.5. We saw some 51 show on the board. I do think that some of those were faked up to 50-1. And then we saw 51 taken out and under money come in yesterday afternoon, and we're back down to 48.5. And that's a number that I would still follow in as well on the over. When I'm looking at this game specifically, season effectively on the line for the LA Rams. They get the big win in New England where they're able to hang on. When you're looking at the conference and what that looks like from the playoff perspective, Rams on the outside looking in the 8th spot. They need to keep winning. They need to keep pace with Washington and Green Bay to make up a deficit. We just talked about how Green Bay is in a favorable spot to win. Even Arizona in front of them, 6-4 in a tightly lined game against the Seattle Seahawks. It's basically a playoff game every week the rest of the season for the LA Rams. You're getting full effort from the offense. You're getting full effort from McVay. You're getting all the play calling. Playbook is wide open. I think that's a positive for any Rams over down the stretch at this part of the season. When I look at the Philadelphia Eagles defense, a ton of accolades throughout Twitter. Anywhere you look, it's Vic Fangio getting praise. It's the defense turning the corner. We are seeing Defensive Rookie of the Year praise for Mitchell, who's looked great. I don't necessarily want to take anything away from the Eagles defense and how great it's looked the last couple of weeks. I just look at this as a much different test for the Eagles overall. Jaden Daniels was hurt last week. It's a coaching staff on the short week. Tough spot for the Commanders. And the week prior, it was Cooper Rush in his first start for the Cowboys, who are a complete mess on offense. The week prior, it was the Jags on the road in Philly, dealing with all the offensive issues that they have had. This upswing for the Eagles and their defense has come against three very easy defenses to exploit. Now, if this Rams offense does have success, we're going to see the Eagles offense opened up. It's really not something we've seen a ton of. On Thursday night, we got a little bit of it, but there was a lot of points taken off the board from field goal misses, from coaching decisions. It wasn't until late where things opened up for the Eagles we saw them really have a lot of success. But it was the first time we've seen them have to be forced into chase mode. And in terms of tempo, when you adjust it, they were running 29 seconds per play. You look back the last handful of weeks in all these games where things were comfortable and they were playing from ahead and they were front running, they're sitting in that 33 to 34 second mark. So you're getting a much quicker version of the Eagles offense when they're forced to play catch up. And you're going to get a much quicker version of the Eagles offense as a whole in this spot against the Rams indoors in LA. I think that bodes very well for them in the over. So if the Rams offense can unlock perhaps a slightly overvalued and overrated Eagles defense, which is now fourth in FPI, it's top 8 for defense in market ratings. That's a pretty high standard that this Eagles defense is being held to. I think the Rams can unlock it and get this Eagles offense sped up. Now, if the Eagles offense is sped up, I think that's another positive for the over as well, as this Rams defense is certainly vulnerable at the linebacker position to RPOs, to play action. And we can see this defense really tested. And that, to me, is another positive for the over. And so I think those things bode well for points in this game, especially if there's a score or two early that opens this game up. I do think we see this game look a lot like Sunday Night Football last week between the Chargers and the Bengals, where it was two teams coming in, one of them not really pushed, getting the ability to play from ahead a lot with a very highly touted defense. And then they step up and face a great offense, and you see things really opened up in a hurry. And so to me, this is a game where we see another very exciting Sunday Night Football with a lot of points going over. Monday Night Football, it's Baltimore on the road at the LA Chargers. Ravens were below 3 for half a minute on Tuesday, and we see this back up to a full field goal for the Ravens on the road. On the other side, we are seeing the Chargers and this total off of that big under on Sunday Night Football get bet up. Opened at 48, now up to 50.5. A very fun game to watch, a very fun game full of storylines. Harbaugh versus Harbaugh. You have Roman against his old team. The storylines here are endless. This is going to be one of the better Monday Night Football games that we're going to have all season long. I'm very much looking forward to watching this game. I don't know if it's one that I am going to be betting. On paper, and just my first reaction and my first thoughts is that Chargers overs are going to be live against any competent offense. And we saw what that looks like against Cincinnati. We've seen Justin Herbert in this offense just look dominant and just be in complete control. 7 yards per play against the Cincinnati Bengals defense, 435 yards of offense. But we also saw them change pretty significantly in tempo once things were getting pressed late. When you adjust out for the course of the game and you weight some of those numbers, we're seeing the Chargers last week against Cincinnati with their highest snap-to-snap tempo of the entire season, nearly 6 seconds per play faster than some of the rates that they were operating at pre-bye. And so now with Herbert healthy, with Herbert scrambling, with Herbert running, and with this offense looking as dominant as it is, we're seeing them play a lot faster. And defensively, teams are really trying to chase and pick up. And we saw the Bengals, when they were forced to chase, operate at a 26 second per snap pace, which was extremely quick. And so Baltimore, we know if they're playing from behind, their tempo gets unlocked in a big way, and they can get moving very quickly. I think they're really going to test this Chargers defense. And if we see this Ravens defense, which I still think even with their current ratings, I mean, I'm looking at Baltimore defensively. They're rated right now from market ratings right around 14th FPI has them right around that range too. I mean, this is a defense that is far worse than they're being rated. And to me, this Chargers offense is certainly going to be able to push this Ravens offense. And anytime we've seen the Ravens offense pushed, I mean, even in games where they haven't, they've flown over the total. But you think about the Washington game where it was pushed and competitive, 7.4 yards per play and 484. Both Bengals games where they were pushed, nearly 7 yards per play and 440 yards of total offense. That Kansas City game early in the season, with all of their issues, it was 450 yards per play. It was a very fast tempo. It was explosive plays. I mean, anytime that they're pushed just a little bit, you're getting into a very competitive game and a very high-scoring game. And so the Chargers are finally getting into a portion of their schedule where we're seeing them push. They've had some very misleading unders throughout the course of late October and early November, and I think we're seeing them turn into an over team, and the Ravens certainly fit that. But obviously the market is catching on to that too, with this game opening at 48, which was right around where it opened against the Bengals and being bet into the low 50s. So you're starting to see that adjusted up. And so I'm not running to go over 50.5 in this spot, at least at the moment. Maybe that's something we see get bet down, as some of these higher totals just get bet blindly under, as we've seen often this season. We already saw with Sunday Night Football, although that one's more defensive driven. I don't get that same sentiment from either of these defenses. And I don't know if we're going to see a wave of under money on this one. So nothing for me, side or total. I'm curious about what we might see later in the week. Hopefully some favorable movement. Maybe that one comes down and it can be acted upon a little bit later. All right, that will do it for me in terms of recapping what went through here on the show. Colts at home, plus 7.5. Certainly stands out to me. Washington, minus 10 at home. The Giants, plus 5.5 at home. Painful. Pats, plus 7 and over, 45.5. Keeping my eye on Arizona, Seattle, Green Bay, minus 2.5. Certainly my favorite side of the week. Philadelphia, LA Rams, over 48 was a release. And then keeping my eye on Baltimore and the LA Chargers. And again, anything that's updated later in the week, or if there's any props that come out, I will have those posted underneath the YouTube video in the pinned comment section. Appreciate everybody for stopping by and dealing with the altered format, albeit posted at the usual time for everybody. Hope you have a fantastic Wednesday, and I will be back bright and early on the podcast feed again tomorrow morning.